Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us today. With regards to our topic for today, as I'm sure you all know, much thought and energy and preoccupation has been directed in recent years on the theme of beneficiary feedback, starting with debates over whether to gather it, and then progressing on to how to gather it, and then what to do with it once you have it. And today, we're very fortunate to get a detailed look at one new approach to this topic, the constituent voice approach, that's been pioneered by Keystone Accountability and its program, Ground Truth Solutions. Our presenter today, Nick van Praag, set up Ground Truth in 2012. Nick's career spans humanitarian and development work with experience with a number of agencies, including UNHCR, the Aga Khan Development Network, and the World Bank. During his career, Nick has focused particularly on the linkages between humanitarian programs and development, and his interest in beneficiary feedback and humanitarian performance stems from his work at the intersection of communication and public policy and his experience with the delivery of humanitarian aid.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Jeanette. And great to have all of you online. I see some names of friends who are very active in this space, so I'm suitably contrite in terms of trying to explain what it is that Ground Truth is up to. I got into this business basically in the mid-1980s when I was working for UNHCR, and my first field mission was working in Eastern Sudan when there was a vast exodus of people from Ethiopia, and the international community was struggling to keep up. The way we, in those days, described the people who were the objects of the attention of the humanitarian system was as caseloads. There really wasn't much of a sense that these were individuals with views that were worth taking into account. And what I would like to do before I really start my presentation is to get your sense through a poll, an online poll we're just going to conduct, as to how do you think we should best describe the people who are the objects or subjects or participants in humanitarian action. I'm going to hand over to Jeanette to do the poll. So if you would just indicate how we should describe them. You have on the right-hand side of your screen now, you've got 20 seconds to select one of these different descriptors, and then we can see where people come out. I think the time is up. Now we have 10 seconds to just do the math. And where do we stand, Jeanette?
Here you go.
So, affected populations, 25%. Partners, 16%. No particular view, 37%. Beneficiaries, 12%. Very interesting. Aid recipients, very low. So I think that's a very interesting outcome, and I will be using different descriptors as we go through, but we all know essentially where we stand. Let's get back to the subject at hand. This kind of approach, seeing the objects of humanitarian action as a kind of caseload, changed radically, and I think if you're looking for a ground zero of accountability to affected populations, it really comes out of the operation in the eastern DRC after the Rwanda genocide, when a joint evaluation of the chaotic relief effort in that part of the world pointed to some serious shortcomings. Very poor coordination and a real absence of accountability to either donors or the people who were supposed to be benefiting from the program. The result of that was a lot of reflection inside the international humanitarian community and a slew of new initiatives in the 90s and early 2000s that provided a range of standards, codes of conduct, certification schemes, capacity building, advice on how to do a better job of being accountable to the people at the receiving end of aid. And I think it's these organizations and these initiatives which have really laid the foundations of the accountability architecture that we know today. They provide the chapter and verse, if you like, on the why and the what of accountability. These supply-side initiatives provided a great basis for these guys, for the operational agencies, to do a better job of holding themselves accountable. But the fact of the matter is that for the most part, what we saw was essentially business as usual. And we're going to, in a second, come to you to ask you why you think that's been the case. But these are all quotes that I have drawn from leaders in the development and humanitarian space over the last 12 months. Louise Arbour, head of the International Crisis Group, former High Commissioner for Human Rights, spoke of a major gap in the current aid framework is the lack of progress on accountability to beneficiaries. Manuel Bessler, who's the head of humanitarian aid in the Swiss administration, spoke about his thoughts that it was unthinkable to plan and lead a humanitarian response without putting these people at the heart of the programming. The President of the World Bank has moved his organization to focus on this agenda as it never has before, and Valerie Amos, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, also is quoted here as saying that accountability to those who we're working to help must be at the forefront of our efforts. So despite the many things that are being done, we're still not there. And what we would like to ask you now is, what do you believe are the greatest obstacles in engaging with affected people, with beneficiaries? And you have 20 seconds, if you would, to let us know what you see as the greatest obstacles you find in engaging with beneficiaries. So we're going to get a sense of your feelings, your views on these things in a few seconds' time. So the polls ended, and we're going to see what you have to say. Okay. Jeanette, here we are. So, lack of practical tools, 23%. Lack of management interest, 17%. Too much else to do, the kind of busy factor. Too few incentives, 12%. And no answer, 36%. So it's sort of spread across the range there. And that's interesting. We can perhaps come back to that in the question and answer session at the end. Our contention, what's the major obstacle been? Our contention is the reason that the operational organizations haven't been as diligent as we would like them to be is because what was missing, or what has been missing, was the authentic voice of beneficiaries, telling the agencies and the donors how they're doing. The ground truth, as George was saying a moment ago, was set up under Keystone's banner in 2012 to try and provide the demand side of the accountability equation in the form of a light touch, continuous approach to feedback from affected populations on how they live and how they experience humanitarian aid. And I want to just go for a minute, delve a little bit deeper into our methodology. As I say, Ground Truth exists as part of Keystone Accountability, which has been operating since 2006. And Keystone has developed a really interesting and effective methodology for collecting and using feedback. And I'd just like to talk for a moment about the DNA of this approach. It's part, if you look at the man on the right, it's part Paulo Freire, Robert Chambers, and others who focused a lot of attention on the sort of participation in development approach, trying to put beneficiaries, the objects of development, and their voice at the center of the development process. They had a sort of struggle, I guess, to get their ideas finding traction for many years. I think what we're seeing today in the development space is a great deal of recognition of the centrality of that approach. Our methodology is based in part on that school, but it's also based in equal part on the customer satisfaction industry. And the man on the left is J.D. Powers, who is the granddaddy of that industry. He was working at General Motors in the 1960s, and he had what he thought was a great idea. He suggested to his bosses that they formulate a questionnaire and send it to all the people who had bought General Motors cars in the past couple of years, and ask them what they thought of the vehicles they purchased. The people who ran the organization, who were mostly engineers, thought he was crazy, and they said, you know, we build these cars, we design them, we build them, they buy them. They can choose the color, perhaps. But he thought he was onto something. And what he did was leave General Motors, and using the Freedom of Information Act, which had just been passed, and don't forget that this was in the 1960s, John F. Kennedy was in the White House, there was a great deal of attention on consumer rights. Ralph Nader had just published Unsafe at Any Speed about problems with cars being manufactured at the time. And J.D. Powers left General Motors using the Freedom of Information Act, got the addresses of people in the state of California with driver's licenses. He formulated a short poll asking them to fill in the make and model of their car at the top and ask them a series of questions about their perceptions of their cars. People in the United States love motor cars. A lot of people responded. And the results were really interesting because they showed that amongst people driving cars, those who were driving a particular make, which was actually a foreign make that was trying to get traction in the US market, but was just about to pull out because it really hadn't succeeded against the automotive majors from Detroit. This make came out at the top of the list. And the rest is history, if you like. An industry was born. The customer satisfaction industry has gone from strength to strength. J.D. Powers set up a hugely successful global company. Many others have emulated him. And that car manufacturer went on to be one of the United States' most popular producer of cars. And we won't do a quiz, but I can just tell you that that car was the Toyota. And this is a picture of the sort of prize model at the time that poll was done, the Toyota Tiara. Going on with constituent voice and how it works, we see 5 essential steps. We start by designing our approach with the organizations running the humanitarian programs, trying to clarify their theory of change, what it is that they're trying to do, and formulating a survey instrument that really emphasizes brevity and being very much to the point. We never ask more than 5 questions. Data collection comes next, and data collection is the relatively easy part. We use enumerators with smartphones, or we use clipboards. We use cell phones where this is possible, and we can talk about some of the technology-related aspects later. The next stage is to analyze that data. What does it mean, and how to respond to it with the organizations running the programs. Fourth, and most important, is closing the loop. This, unless this is done, unless you get back to people in the communities who provided data, they will become increasingly frustrated and unwilling to participate in future rounds of data collection. But if you do engage them, if you go back to them and say, this is what we heard, did we hear that right? This is what we propose to do about it. Should we go up a bit? Should we go down a bit? If one does that, you begin to earn their candor, and the quality of the data rises. Having closed the loop, the next step is to actually move to using the data and making course corrections in the way the program is designed, and then going back in an iterative process to data collection, analysis, loop closing. It's a constant process of collecting data, understanding it, doing something with it, and then keeping a finger on the pulse. And I think it's important to point out that these micro-surveys don't tell you all the answers, don't give you all the answers. They're like a thermometer. They tell you whether you've got a temperature, whether you're well or not. They can tell you whether there's a problem, but they can't tell you exactly what that problem is. It's only one in a series of diagnostic tools used in medicine, and the same is true with us. If our data suggests that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, you need to dig deeper and find out what's going on. It's the kind of canary in the mine shaft, if you like. And that's why closing the loop and other forms of supplemental, additional investigation, deliberation, dialogue with the constituents of humanitarian intervention, that's why those are crucial steps. What we look at in these questions, in these very few questions that we ask often, are around three dimensions. And we try and hone in on these, what we call key perception indicators, a new form of key performance indicator, and hopefully predictive of outcomes down the road. The first thing we look at is to try and formulate questions around the quality of the relationship between benefactor and beneficiary. And we try and do that by asking questions that relate to trust, to competence, and to responsiveness, to try and get at the kind of core of the relationship. And we think this is really important because in the kinds of circumstances that prevail in most humanitarian disasters, or even after the disaster has passed, but the situation remains and people still find themselves in limbo, these are almost by definition non-market circumstances. People don't have a lot of choice between providers of different services. But what they can do is they can engage or they can disengage. And a disengaged group of people is far less likely to produce an effective program and the kind of results that one would like to see. So the relationship questions are absolutely central. We also look at the quality, the timeliness, and the relevance of services. Often we find that some services which are oversupplied are not seen as centrally important, and other services which are seen as vitally important are undersupplied. So we try and get at some of those issues this way. And we look at services that range from everything from protection to food distribution to distribution of non-food items, and so forth and so on. One can really determine what those questions are based on the kind of program and the priorities that that program has established. The third group of questions we look at are outcomes, questions that can help predict what's going to happen, results down the road. And I'm going to give you some examples of all of these questions in a moment, and I hope it will become clearer. What we do is we're asking people's perceptions of these issues. We're not asking about facts, and that, I think, distinguishes our methodology significantly from other surveys and other assessments that are ongoing in most humanitarian programs at the moment. But what we do is, in order to make this data really useful, this qualitative data really useful, we turn it into a metric that organizations can trace over time. And we do that by asking people to score a statement on a scale of 1 to 5 or 0 to 10. We're experimenting actually with different scales at the moment. And that gives us a metric which you can track and respond to over time. This is a photo from Haiti of one of our enumerators in a camp there before that camp was relocated, with a smartphone asking one of the inhabitants of the camp his opinion on various issues. We collect the data, as I said earlier, mostly using smartphones loaded with these 5-question micro-surveys. We also use SMS on occasion, and IVR, where you have a voice prompt on the telephone. SMS does not work well in low literacy environments, of course. In Pakistan, it's a very low-tech environment in eastern Sindh where we're working, and there we're working in a kind of the old-fashioned way, if you like, using a clipboard. We're going to go to another poll now, which is, why does beneficiary feedback matter? And the options that we're offering you are, it enables us to design and run better programs. Beneficiaries have smart ideas we should pay attention to. It's a moral, ethical imperative, and it doesn't matter because we know best. So those are the 4 options that we would like you to score. And you have 20 seconds to do that. And that should be interesting to see where you come out. And all those of you who haven't answered the question so far, please try and come in on that one. That would be really helpful. Thank you. You just click on the letter and submit. So the poll is now over. We have 10 seconds before Jeanette gives us the results of that. So Jeanette, your machine is rather slow today. 10 seconds seem to be rather long.
I apologize. Here they come.
Here they come. Aha. So that's great. The real sense that it can help drive better program design and better programs. No one thinks we know best, which is a very good sign. I guess you wouldn't be following this webinar if you did think that was the case. I was just say, oh wow, that's great. The numbers have just gone up. So really a very significant number of votes for option A, and much fewer people with no answer, and no one at all thinks it's irrelevant. So these are really strong results. Okay, I'm going to now talk you through some of the data we're getting from pilots that we're doing in Haiti, the Sindh province of Pakistan, where this picture is taken, and work we're just hoping to begin in the Syrian theatre. Let's start with Sindh. One of the questions that's absolutely central to this program. Let me just give you 2 seconds of background on this program. This is a classic rural support program. It's in an area of Sindh that was very badly hit by the floods in 2010 and again in 2011. ECHO has given 30 million euros for a recovery program that's run by Mercy Corps in conjunction with the National Rural Support Program, which is a very large sort of quasi-governmental organization in Pakistan that has a lot of experience in this area. And the Rural Support Program, the Rural Support Program model is like a 3-legged stool. It actually began in Bangladesh. The Grameen Bank was a great pioneer of this approach. And the idea is that you pull together the community, the local government, and sort of non-governmental organization to kind of push a process forward. And the process doesn't work unless you have all 3 legs of the stool in place. So one of the questions that we ask in SIND is, and it relates to the relationship quality and trust, and the question is, are you confident that the local government will do its best to support your community? And as you can see, the scale here, we have the 0 axis there, and it goes from -100 to +100. That's how we have that's the metric that we've created from the qualitative data. You can see that in the first round of data collection, people had very little trust in the local government. That was -30 on the left-hand side of that slide. When we went back to the people running the program, they explained this away and said, you know, people probably hadn't understood the question and didn't really make any sense. Relationships with the local government were great. And then 3 months later, we went back and did another round of data collection. And what that round of data collection showed us was that the negative perceptions remained stubbornly low. And we ask, after having people score these statements, we ask them, why did you score the statement as you did? And that gives a lot of additional qualitative data that you can turn into another metric, but it also gives you a lot of insight as to what's going on. And this is a word cloud made up of the responses to the question why. And the larger the writing, the more frequently that response was given. So you can see local government does not help us, local government will not help us, local government has not helped, will not help. So there's a stock of negativity. And as our partners, Mercy Corps and the National Rural Support Program, closed the loop with these with the people who provided the feedback data, it became clear what lay behind these negative attitudes. They felt that the people from the government never came to see them. They didn't respond to their stated goals, and didn't respond in any way really to what was happening in these communities. The government got this information from our partners through that we had elicited, and they started visiting. They started explaining how they were going to work with Mercy Corps and NRSP and the communities to make things better. And 3 months later, scores went way up. Interestingly enough, the 4th round of data collection is the 2nd week of August, so we will be able to see whether that upward trajectory, you can see it's now, it's not fabulous, but it's over the 0 axis, so it's into positive territory. So here was a response on the part of the people running the program to the feedback data in fairly short order. So over the course of a few months, we've seen some real change. The next example, I want to give you a couple of examples, are from Haiti, where we're working with 3 organizations, Concern Worldwide, Oxfam GB, and JPHRO, the Sean Penn Haitian Relief Organization. And they're implementing very similar camp relocation projects in different parts of Port-au-Prince. And the big issues that we uncovered when we were sort of setting this process up in the design phase were protection, people's sense of vulnerability and safety, and the sustainability of the program going forward. And I'm going to look at the data that relates just to those 2 issues. We've done 3 rounds of data collection so far. Actually, we've done 4, but we don't have the results from the 4th round, which took place just last week. But let's have a look at the first question, which is a kind of service-related question. And it looks at protection. And we got plus and minus 100 as the possible scores. In round 1, do you feel safe and accepted in the place where you live? And we had this incredibly low score. This was when people were still in the camps. They hadn't yet been relocated into communities. And we had a very, very low score. People were desperate. Many of you have probably visited those camps. And the organizations running this program went to the UN security people, they went to the Haitian police, and they said, look, we have got this data which shows that we knew things were bad, we didn't know they were this bad, and we didn't know, this is a representative sample, 95% confidence interval, people are really concerned. And the UN security folks and the Haitian police said, well, they're right to be concerned, these are incredibly insecure environments, and that we will not go into these camps at night, they're just too dangerous. So the organization then says, well, what we're going to do is, if we can't improve the security situation, we're going to speed up the relocation of people in those camps. And they began to hasten that process. And 3 months later, out of the camps, perceptions had changed enormously. They'd gone from -80 to +80. And that was interesting in one way, but it was interesting in another way, because a lot of the effort that the organizations were about to put into their post-camp programs related to trying to improve relations between the local community and the people who were arriving from the camps, setting up sort of football teams, community activities of different kinds. And what this data showed, not just here, but in the 2 other locations where we were collecting data, was that people, once they'd moved into these new neighborhoods, felt safe and accepted. And the kinds of preoccupations which were driving program design seemed not to hold. So resources could then be transferred into other areas of endeavor. And in the 3rd round of data collection, people continued to feel pretty safe and accepted in the place where they lived. We formulated the question in that way because we wanted it to cover both the camp environment and the post-camp environment. As I say, round 4 data we shall have very soon. Last question in Haiti I wanted to talk to you about relates to outcomes. If you remember, we had relationship, quality, services, and outcomes as the 3 dimensions of our methodology. The perceptions that we look at through our methodology. Now, here we have the 0 axis at the top of this graph. And in the 1st round, people were still in the camps here, and -15 was the score. They felt negative about their ability to pay their rent in a year's time, but they were sort of hoping that things would work out. They were so keen to get out of these camps, which were wretched. And let me just say that the principal incentive to get people out of the camps and close those camps down is to give them a rental subsidy, which is paid to the owner of the accommodation, which lasts a year. And it seemed like a good idea at the time, but what we've seen is that there's a lot of preoccupation, or there was a lot of preoccupation as to whether people would be able to cope. So 1st round, slightly negative about whether they'd be able to do so. 2nd round, people had now been out of the camps for 3 months, and they were very, very concerned. They saw how difficult it was to make ends meet, and they were extremely concerned about their ability to pay after a year or when the subsidy ran out. And 3 months later, we see that they are pretty desperate. And this was already a red flag in round 2. By round 3, the alarm bells were ringing, and it was really time to begin to do something about it. Early on, people have been saying, well, maybe they're just trying to game the system. Maybe these people think that if they say that things are bad, they'll get some kind of, additional year's rental subsidy or something like that. But we asked another question, and the other question relates to agency. I call it the Kennedy question. You remember Kennedy in his inaugural address when he became president called on Americans not to ask what America could do for them, but to think about what they could do for America. And we have a sort of similar question, trying to get at whether people feel able to pull their own weight. And this is a question we asked in the Haiti survey, or we continue to ask in the Haiti survey: are you ready to play your part to be successfully integrated in the community where you live? And you can see that people really feel very strongly, and this is all in sort of goes from +38 or so to +70. People really want to be able to do to fend for themselves and their families, but find it extremely difficult to do so. And the question why, we ask, as you remember, why did you score that statement as you did? Why do you feel you won't be able to pay your rent in a year's time? People here were saying, and this was again a word cloud based on what they said, I don't have any work, I don't do anything, I don't have any economic means. So, and also interestingly in the follow-up, in the closing the loop, people said, if you gave 50% of the rental subsidy to the person who owns the accommodation and 50% to us, we could actually begin to set up a stand, do some minor entrepreneurial activity. Just to end, I wanted to just go through with you for a second, what are the lessons that we've learned from the pilots so far? And these really have been a fascinating process of testing the approach. We haven't found the Holy Grail by any means, but we've learned a lot. First of all, organizations need the right incentives if they're to get serious about accountability to affected people. And these incentives need to be both external, from donors who make it a condition of the aid they provide, that the organizations they support will seek this data, and the public, because a lot of resources come from the public. And there need to be incentives within organizations so that frontline staff are motivated both to listen and to respond. Second, and we sort of come to the bottom of this thing, is we need to ensure that we don't burden beneficiaries with too many questions. And they need to understand that it's worth their while to engage and answer and close the loop and contribute to this process of deliberation and dialogue. Too often you have surveys which are conducted, many, many surveys, many, many questions, much time devoted to it, and people never hear anything again. And often there's so much data collected that it's very difficult to analyze it, let alone act on it. And that comes to the third lesson, which is about use. And using the data is absolutely critical, and it's much more challenging than simply collecting it. And as I said earlier, it requires analysis, it requires making sense of it, it requires getting back to the respondents, and of course it means course correcting and taking on the inputs that are received. And finally, if you're going to do that, if you're going to use the data, you need to have a continuous stream of feedback. Periodic data is far too easy to ignore, and it's only ongoing data that provides the benchmarks against which you can manage a program effectively over time against the perceptions of the people who you're trying to help. Where does that take us? I guess the constituent voice model boils down in the humanitarian space to the following. If agencies are committed to listening and responding to what they hear, beneficiary engagement increases. And the combination of that commitment and that engagement results in better, more responsive performance. I think, just to end by saying that beneficiary feedback is not the only measure of humanitarian performance, but it's the most under-measured measure, and represents a very powerful cut-through tool for organizations focused on humanitarian effectiveness. And just to end by emphasizing that our approach is very much dependent on working closely with other methodologies in the accountability space. The practical listening approach that's been developed by the CDA Listening Project, by the communications work done by the CDAC network, by the work that HAP is doing, by the work that ALMAP's doing. Ours is a piece in the puzzle. We see it as an important keystone piece, if you like, in the accountability puzzle, but it will not work unless it's supported by these other endeavors. So perhaps I'll hand over now and to our
Great, Nick.
and take your question.
Nick, thank you very much. That was a fascinating presentation. And Nick, apologies to you and also to the others on the line for our audio trouble. We usually enforce a force mute for all of our participants, but obviously that didn't work so well today. So apologies for that. We have a number of excellent questions lined up, and Nick, if you don't mind, I'm just going to pitch a couple of them to you. We've got about 10 minutes left, but we started a little late and then we lost a little bit of time to audio. So if folks are interested, maybe we can go over just by a couple of minutes. But Nick, the first two questions both have to do really with context of a humanitarian situation wherein you might want to employ the constituent voice approach. The first one is in conflict areas. So Madhushadan Singh asks us, in conflict areas, both parties can misunderstand us. So how can we help affected people and at the same time protect our own teams? So again, really coming at it from a security perspective in a conflict area. And then the second one, somewhat related, is what are some of the practical tools that can be used with communities with low literacy levels? And that ties to the broader question of how technology dependent is this approach, Nick, and what would you do in a particularly low literacy area? So again, conflict area and low literacy areas. Your thoughts?
On 1 second, there's something buzzing in the background. Be 2 seconds.
Okay, well, Nick's tending to the buzzing. Actually, he's getting a delivery. Let me just also ask one other question. So, Nick, the other question I want to add to your list while you're at it is conflict areas, low literacy levels, and then because we lost audio while you were talking about Killian Kleinschmidt from UNHCR, if you wanted to reiterate that point, that might be helpful as well.
Okay. Thanks. Well, listen, in conflict situations, which are sadly very prevalent these days, one feels, just reading the newspapers, one feels trapped by a rising tide of violence on every front. It's incredibly depressing. But in conflict areas, it is very difficult. There are, as the question implies, there are many aspects that have to be taken into consideration, and one needs to come up with an approach which ensures the security of people and begins to build trust with those people who are the objects of humanitarian attention. And I think one of the points to bear in mind, in certain conflict situations, it's obviously very difficult to even sort of get out there looking at what's happening inside Syria, et cetera, et cetera. But where one does, and where one continues to elicit information, and there are lots of ways of doing that, and some interesting experiments are going on at the moment in Syria, what's really clear is that if this process of interaction occurs over time, you earn people's candor. And some of the suspicions that may exist in many of these kinds of difficult contexts are eroded over time, and you earn that candor. And that's a really important, I think, learning that we have made in the different places that we're operating. Although I should say that, as you see, we're operating not in conflict zones at the moment. Our methodology hasn't been employed in conflict zones, and that would be a whole new level of complexity that we would have to take on board and try and build into what we're doing. Many humanitarian programs, of course, take place in non-conflict areas where people have sort of fled across the border from conflict or fled from one part of the country to another, or as a result of a natural disaster. So there's lots of opportunity to employ this approach, even if it's not necessarily, we haven't tested it in conflict areas. Low literacy levels, this really lends itself, these kinds of circumstances lend themselves to face-to-face enumeration, collecting data face-to-face. If you want a representative sample, which we do, because that's the basis of our metrics, the whole approach, the face-to-face approach, is very important. We've also experimented with IVR, where you get a call and a voice asks you to push 1 if you totally disagree, 2 if you agree, whatever, and score a statement that way. We've had very little luck with that. people are suspicious of calls, cold calls, even if you sent an SMS ahead of time, et cetera, et cetera. So low literacy is a problem, and it's certainly relating to SMS. It's a huge problem. There are ways around it. The technological solutions aren't necessarily the answer as in our experience so far. What I was saying about Killian, you lost some audio. What I was saying about Killian was that he was camp manager in Zaatari, and he told me that the way I know what's going on in the camp is when I go around and someone with a headscarf gives me a kiss on both cheeks, and I gather from that gesture that things are going pretty well. And I told this to some Syrian refugee friends of mine that evening in Amman, and they said, tell your friend Killian to beware the kiss of fear. I think that points to the centrality of avoiding anecdote, even from people at the front line, and trying to get data which is pretty robust, so that you can begin to formulate sound program design and sound program implementation around it.
Great. Thanks for that, Nick. All right, two questions. One, a provocative question, and the other one I think you'll appreciate getting. The second one is, where can we find guidelines on this approach? So someone interested in following up after this session and learning more about constituent voice. And now the provocative one. I'll give you both at the same time. From Matthew, thanks, Nick, very interesting and useful. It seems to me that a key problem is often the arrogance of providers, a lack of willingness to actually adapt their programs. How could we have an independent constituent voice, for example, where the feedback is not necessarily collected by the very actors who need to adapt their approaches?
Well, very good questions. In terms of guidelines, there is a technical note that we have on the constituent voice methodology, which is available on on the Keystone website, and in the Ground Truth Solutions website, we also have a section of the site given over to methodology. We are reaching the end of our pilot phase, and we are about to write up a kind of ground truth in a box, if you like, which would be something that people could use to employ this methodology themselves, and we'll certainly so the technical notes, the methodological material on the websites, and I can send that to you, George and Jeanette, and we can send it round to others. And the sort of more developed note will be forthcoming soon, providing clear guidelines about using this methodology in the field. Now, the provocative question, I don't find provocative. I find it really central and a really, really good question. In the customer satisfaction industry, there's something called courtesy bias. Courtesy bias is when I ask you if you like me, or I ask you if you like my presentation, and you tell me you did, even though you may have had reservations about it, because you're courteous, and it's called the courtesy bias. And we've actually done some experimentation with this. If someone from a given organization asks the question, there tends to be a 30% positive bias compared to when an independent person asks that same question. So, of course, you can take that bias into account as you crunch your numbers. But better, we've discovered, to have the process of data collection undertaken by an independent enumerator, and we're working with a big social science research organization in Haiti, with an organization in Pakistan that specializes in capacity building for the non-governmental sector. So to work with independent people who can put this stuff together. Now, there's another argument that's made, and actually I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to people at the International Rescue Committee, and they were saying, really interestingly to me, they were saying, this data needs to be made public. Because if we want to really start getting serious about this, it needs to be in the public domain. And I think there is an argument to put this kind of data in the public domain. I think most important at this stage is that people get comfortable collecting it, analyzing it, responding to it, and then we start sort of finding ways to get it out into the public domain to act as the kind of external incentive that the system probably needs to overcome some of the kinds of characteristics that Matthew pointed to.
Well, Nick, it's interesting that you'd make that point about sort of the visibility or transparency of the results, because one question that just came in from Kennedy Eben is, at what time should you involve government in the beneficiary feedback, given that most governments, especially in Africa, do not take kindly to feedback that seems to discredit them? So again, getting at this question of how broadly can and should you share those results? Or how should you shape the questions even, knowing that there may be certain repercussions?
I mean, our experience in certainly in relation to the Syrian theater is that it's a highly politicized context, and you have to bring the government in at the very beginning. You can't just go around asking these questions in refugee camps without getting the buy-in of the local government. But I think the point here is that the organizations need to demonstrate in a very consistent way that this is the new way of humanitarianism, and that this is a perspective that we absolutely must have if we're to move things forward. And I think what we're seeing conditions which are being considered by the US government, by ECHO, and by other donors, which will make the collection and action on data from affected populations will make that absolutely mandatory. So governments will need, I guess, to go along with that precept. It needs to be done in a very subtle way. It shouldn't be sort of forced upon them. But my experience, I was in the north of Iraq recently, and I was really struck by how the government representatives up there thought this was really great, and they said would be fantastic, but you need to guarantee us that the humanitarian organizations will listen to this data and do something about it. So I guess where government stands on this issue varies from place to place, but I think it would be good if it becomes a kind of condition of humanitarian assistance, and governments and organizations begin to just factor it in as a matter of course into the way they operate.
Great. Thank you for that. And that's actually a great lead into our next question, the question or the request posed to you by in northern Iraq. And that relates to closing the loop. So Rosebel Asiri had asked earlier if you could talk a little bit more about what you mean by closing the loop. So once you've designed the survey, once you've gathered the feedback, how is it that you utilize that in such a way to both assist in your programming, of course, but also, as you said, to build that relationship with those you've been asking questions of to enable further dialogue and further feedback in the future? Could you discuss a little bit more on how you close the loop?
Yeah, and you can do it in different ways. And I think the important thing is to think of, well, what is the purpose of this? We've got this data. It's got a high confidence interval, so it's pretty robust data. What do we make of it? Because as we only ask very few questions which touch on key issues, but they don't tell you the whole story, and you see that there are problems, you need to dig deeper into that. So you can do it in many different ways. You can do it through focus groups, pulling together people you think will be useful, or they can be self-selected by the communities in which you're operating. What we tend to advise against is just working through sort of established councils or power structures that have been put in place, because that can lead to sort of pressures being placed on people who then don't speak their mind as openly as they might. But also one can use key informant interviews. There's a whole range of ways of trying to make sense of what it is that you've learned and think through with the community or with representatives of the community or people from the community how you might react to it. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach, but the idea I think to keep in mind is what you're trying to achieve is to really understand what you're hearing and prepare yourselves to be able to act upon it.
Excellent. Nick, I think that's actually a perfect place for us to end this discussion, or at least for today. Thank you so much for the presentation, particularly during your leave time, and very much appreciate the more in-depth presentation that you're able to provide all of us. And for those listening who are interested in finding out more, you should see on your screen now the basic contact details for Nick and for the Ground Truth Solutions website, where of course you can take your investigations to the next level if you're interested in pursuing this further. So again, Nick, an excellent presentation. Thank you for that. And before we sign off and say goodbye for today, I just want to mention to folks that if any of you are interested in the topic of social media, particularly how it can be employed really before, during, and after emergency situations, both by aid providers and by affected communities themselves, please plan to tune in to our webinar on August 26th with Timo Lege of Social Media for Good. We hope to see you there. But again, as for today, Nick, a hearty thanks for your presentation today. And thank you as well to all of those who have joined us. We look forward to seeing you again at a future disasterready.org webinar. A good rest of the day to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.